Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois. And we have got a great show for you today. It's another question and answer show. And this time it's all about soils and compost. The gardening season is underway. And I bet a lot of you are getting those hands dirty, those trowels dirty, and those shovels dirty. You might have questions about soils, and we have been getting some into the extension office. So these are from real people like you, listeners and viewers. So we are going to be answering these on air. And you know, I am not doing this by myself. I am joined, as always, every week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville, Illinois. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. I think spring definitely has exploded in the last week. It's been nice and warm. It's everywhere now.
Spring has it landed right on our heads. We had storms roll through Illinois last week. We had lots of thunderstorms, and immediately after that, things just went from brown to green everywhere. Flowers popping, everything's happening right now.
Yeah, we need to get some more rain though. Our raised beds are starting to dry out. We have to drag out the hose and start watering here soon.
I know it's been so. Things are greening up, but we don't have as much vegetative cover as normal. And so soils are exposed, they're drying out very quickly, and it's warmer than it has been in years past. Just listening to the news last night, and we are averaging about 15 to 20 degrees above average this spring. So for this last week. And even as we record this, the next few days, early April, we're going to be in the 80s. For several days, and so it's going to be hot.
Yeah, and it's been windy too, which is going to help suck that water out of the soil. So
exactly. So there's going to be for us in our neck of the woods, there's going to be a lot of farmers out in the field, tilling, spraying, do all kinds of stuff, and so it's busy right now. But Ken, I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room here. We have a theme song that we have been using to intro this podcast last several times. And I will admit to you, Ken, I was not in love with this at first, but now I can't listen to an old episode. Like, we go back to old episodes for some of our clerical reporting stuff. I'm like, there's no intro music. This is lousy. I love this song now. And so listeners, viewers, you probably are familiar with this, but Ken, you tracked that song down for us, so thank you.
You're welcome. Procrastination is a powerful motivator.
It sure is. Yes, after 3 years, we finally have an intro song, and it's over the top, and I love it. It's great. So, Ken, I guess we can't delay any further. We do need to get to these questions here, all about soils and compost. So, would you mind kicking us off this week, please?
I can do that. So I think we've got several questions here on amending soils. So start with the first one here I am a novice gardener. Can you recommend a user-friendly soil test for me to buy that will guide me through the amendment process?
Well, I would say a user-friendly soil test that guides you through the amendment process. And so in this case, the question is about, they want to test their soil, and then they want step-by-step what to do after that. And they want to buy a kit probably to do this all at home. And I will say, when it comes to soil testing, the kits that you buy at the store, they really don't provide reliable or consistent results in terms of like soil nutrients. Probably the best thing you can get out of that is a pH reading. Even that can be a little bit inconsistent. So we recommend using a commercial lab. It costs probably the same amount as those kits that you would buy at the store, plus postage. You got to send it to the mail, or if there's a lab nearby, drop it off. Or a lot of times your local soil water conservation office will just do it, take the soil sample and send it off for you. So you have options. Contact wherever you are locally, Soil and Water. Your extension office might know where to get a soil test or where to send it. But Illinois Extension, we no longer do soil testing here as a state organization. Ken, I haven't seen much in terms of reliable home soil test kits, at least. Have you?
I haven't either. And like you said, you're paying for a commercial one's probably going to be about the same price, if not cheaper, than buying a kit from the store.
And they will give you recommendations. That soil lab will give you recommendations based upon those results. And then the other thing, Ken and I, we get soil test reports from gardeners, landscapers, fruit and vegetable growers. So whoever, if you have that report back from your soil test, we're happy to talk about that with you. And so I just did that this morning for a home gardener who had a overabundance of phosphorus in their soil. Let's just say that. And so, but we can have that conversation once you get that soil test results back.
And one thing I'd add for that soil test, wherever you're doing it, make sure you're telling them you're doing it for a garden, for residential use. Otherwise, you may find out how much fertilizer you need to grow corn and beans, not for your vegetable garden. So make sure you include that. And a lot of places will include the analysis, or like a write-up of it. Some places don't, so that's another thing you may want to check on too.
Yeah, give them a call, ask them what they do, and ask them what they need. I always say, just ask them, how much soil do you need? How do you want me to collect it? We also have videos on that process, and I can leave a link to those below in the show notes and video description on how to gather soil tests. So we can definitely provide that. Well, Ken, on to our next question, and you've probably never had to deal with clay soils before, but how do you amend a heavy clay soil? Do we have any suggestions for those people?
So your best bet is to do organic matter, compost, something like that. That'll help loosen up that soil, improve the drainage, and so on. So organic matter is probably going to be the number one. You hear sand suggested a lot. But that gets kind of tricky if you don't put enough sand in there. You end up making like cement, and you got to put a lot. I don't know what the exact ratio is, but it is kind of a mind-boggling amount of sand that you're probably never going to buy that much.
And when you look at that soil textural triangle that has clay, silt, sand, yeah, I mean, it doesn't take much clay to be a clay soil. Like the clay takes up a huge part of the soil textural triangle. And so, like Ken said, the volume of sand to outweigh or to mitigate that clay soil, you're talking dump trucks and stuff. So you'd be amending on a broad scale. So compost, organic matter, some type of degradable mulch material that can help. A lot of people are turning to cover crops as well, and so there are options out there, but just buying a bag of sand at the store is not going to cut it.
Or do a raised bed, just build on top of it and avoid it altogether.
Avoid your lousy heavy clay soil and just grow on top of it. I like that.
Make some pottery.
Yes.
All right, so our next one, speaking of sand, what kind of sand is best to add to a small garden?
Well, when it comes to sand, if you're going to be amending on a small scale, in my mind, I would say the coarser, the better. And by coarse, I mean the larger sand particle sizes. You probably want to avoid a lot of the fine particle size sand, which would be like clay sand. I don't know if some of the masonry sand is a little bit finer textured, but some of the bigger, coarser stuff, you want to be able to see probably little pebbles in there in an ideal setting. So coarser, larger sand, if that is the avenue that you're going to turn to.
Is it called a sharp sand sometimes?
Maybe there'd probably be multiple names, but yeah, you're wanting a larger particle size. You do not want the fine particle size.
No pool filter stuff, or is that big?
Yes.
I don't have a pool, so
I don't have a pool. Couldn't tell you. I'll have to go talk to some people that have a pool, which is not me. Okay, so our next question is about manure. So when is the best time to add manure, or let's say other fertilizers, to the garden?
So for your manure, if you're doing like a raw uncomposted manure, you want to put that on in the fall, so it's got time to break down, because that manure could have pathogens, bacteria, stuff like that, that could, especially if you're doing this on a vegetable garden, that could have human impacts. So it just should be 120 days before harvest if the crop is going to be coming in direct contact with it. So if you're growing leafy greens, carrots, things like that, they're actually going to be touching the soil. Otherwise, it's going to be 90 days before harvest if the part that you're going to be eating is not exposed to the soil. Things like sweet corn, probably tomatoes would fall into that too. So fall is going to be the best time, or first thing in the spring, if you're going to be doing that. Ideally, though, you'd probably be using composted manure that's going to be broken down. If it's composted correctly, there should be fewer weed seeds in there than a fresh, and things like that. As far as fertilizer, that's going to depend a little bit on the type you're putting down. If it's an organic kind of slow release, you could probably get away with in the fall, like a compost, something like that. Others, again, early in the year, if it's a quick release synthetic type, like your liquid fertilizers, things like that, that would be kind of almost as needed, because that's immediately available to the plants. It doesn't need to be broken down to release the nutrients like the organic types will be.
And I think, as we've mentioned, do a soil test just to know if you even need to do any of that. As I had said right off the top of the show, we talked to a person with a soil test report that came back that they actually had 7 times the maximum amount of phosphorus that they should have in their soil. And so that's almost to the point where that amount of phosphorus is toxic to the plant, because it doesn't allow the plant to take up any other nutrients. So those soil tests are very valuable. Again, we can leave a link down below to different soil labs, both commercial labs and university labs.
All right, we'll stick with the organic matter and manure here. How deeply should we mix in organic matter, such as manure or other sources?
Okay. Well, provided that we are, again, doing this in the fall, usually the recommendations that I see when they are recommending to till or incorporate organic matter like manure into the soil, they're saying very often till it to a depth of 6 to 8, sometimes 10 inches. So you're tilling, significant a portion of that soil volume. It's not always necessary, especially if you do this in the fall, to always till it in. A lot of times that organic matter can work its way down through that top layer, that soil profile. But if you, and I know people who they are looking forward right now to firing up that tiller. It's what they do every year. Nothing I could say about soil structure and all that's going to stop them. They're going to want to know how deep to till. 6 to 8, sometimes 10 inches, depending on the crop that you're growing, if it's like a carrot root crop or something. Okay, Ken, so our next question is about the quantity of organic matter. So is it harmful to have organic matter over 5% in terms of your soils?
I don't know about over 5%. You probably don't want too much more than that. If you start getting into too much organic matter, you probably start getting to that double-digit percentage, like your soil test before. They probably had quite a bit, and you can get too much phosphorus. You can start getting nutrient levels that can become potentially toxic to plants. So again, doing a soil test and seeing, if you've got 5%, you may not need to add any compost or whatever for a year or two, and especially if you get those double digits. Stop. Don't put it down for a while and let that kind of work down, so it's not creating a potentially toxic environment for your plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, another good reason for soil testing, so you can monitor your organic matter levels, because a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm going to put I need soil, and they'll go buy a bag of compost. Well, compost is organic matter, and organic matter is not permanent. It's not a mineral like sand, silt, or clay. And so compost or organic matter is not permanent. It can go away, it can build up, so it can shift over time. And so that's, again, another good reason for soil testing, just to monitor your organic matter levels.
So next one here is, are coffee grounds good to put in the garden? And if so, how much?
Um, I would say I don't often recommend coffee grounds to go directly into a garden setting. Um, just thinking about what are coffee grounds, they are they're coffee beans that have been roasted, and a lot of people see the coffee grounds maybe after they come through the coffee filter. They're wet, they're gross, and they think, well, this looks like soil, I can just put it onto the soil. But it's not soil. This is just a ground up bean. It hasn't decomposed, it hasn't done anything yet. So a lot of or any of that, like plant available nutrients, they're not there yet, because the grounds still have to go through that decomposition to release those nutrients to those plants. And so you can try a compost pile in terms of, to decompose them, to make them more plant available. But you do have to be a little bit careful of coffee grounds in general, because they are acidic. And so, that might be more of a situation where you would use this around like that, some type of coffee ground compost around something like blueberries or azaleas or rhododendrons, acid loving plants, in that the location there. Just be careful with coffee grounds. I have had a worm bin for over 10 years now, and I realized that I was actually getting dangerously acidic because I kept putting my coffee grounds in there, and the worms were not surviving. And I'm like, why do my worms keep dying? And then after doing some research, I'm like, oh, I've been putting coffee grounds in there like every day for like 2 years, and that they're just, I think the acidity of coffee is like anywhere from 4.5 to 5.5 as it comes out of the pot there. So I imagine the grounds are quite acidic.
I don't know, like a big pile. I'm saying this as a person who does not drink coffee, so I don't know how much coffee grounds people produce. But I think like a big pile, it's probably going to have a negligible effect
Yeah.
on the pH. But yeah, something smaller like a worm bin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got to be careful. Coffee grounds and citrus. Yeah, they worms don't like too much acid in their bedding there, so you got to be careful. Okay, well, Ken, in terms of kitchen scraps and throwing things out into the yard, is calcium from eggshells a good source for calcium? And how do you make it readily available to plants?
I'd say it can be, but just the eggshell itself, being like coffee grounds and a lot of other things we've talked about, it's all tied up, so it's going to have to be broken down in order to release that calcium from there. So just tossing eggshells into a compost bin or anything like that, it's you're not going to get the calcium from that, because that stuff's going to take a while to break down. Get your blender out, or your whatever food processor, grind that stuff up into more of a powder, and then you can add that to your compost, and that'll break down and release that calcium much more quickly.
Yeah, because eggshells are hard. Like they are, from a chemistry standpoint, it's hard to break them down. So make them smaller so there's more surface area for microorganisms to do that job faster. Yeah, turn it into a powder. I like that.
Yeah, well, move on to composting then, since we've already started on a little bit here. Can I put kitchen scraps directly into the garden, or does it need to sit in a composter for a little while before it goes into the garden?
This is an interesting question. I probably should have reviewed these a little bit better. But before the show, Ken and I were talking about this particular soil test from this morning, and with the overabundance of nutrients that the soil test report had. And the interesting story here is the client, he's been married for over 40 years. They've gardened every year, he said, and they fertilized a few times decades ago, but the main thing that they put out there is kitchen scraps. For decades and decades, they have been putting kitchen scraps out there in the garden. Now, I think the first thing that came to my mind was like, wow, and you don't have just a multi-generational family of raccoons that live there in that garden, or what's the rodent problem like there, or just all these I just see Rocky Raccoon bellying up to the bar out there. Yes, you do need to compost these things, like coffee grounds, like eggshells. This stuff is not plant available right away, and so composting them first will, that way it will break it down in a more controlled environment, as opposed to just dumping them on the ground and hoping they decompose or the rodents and varmints don't get to it first. So yes, it does need to go to a composter first.
Yeah, I don't know how they wouldn't have wildlife everywhere. One year we had our compost a little too close to our garden and we just got wiped out. Things would go from the compost, eat stuff, squirrels, whatnot, and then just run right into the garden.
Yeah.
And just eat everything.
I have no idea. That must be like a Roman fortress or something. I don't know what's happened there. Oh, right. Well, our next composting question is, how long do you compost table scraps before introducing them to garden soil? And it looks like they're asking specifically, like including like fall leaves with this too.
Depends.
It depends. I like
So
that.
a lot of that depends on what type of composter you are. If you're a lazy one like me and you just have a static pile that you don't turn or really take care of, you just toss stuff on it. It may take you a couple of years before you get a good compost. If you're somebody that's actively turning and watering if it needs water and you've got a nice, good, active hot pile, couple months, probably 3-4 months, probably. Basically, you need to compost it until you can no longer tell what it used to be. It should look like compost or kind of like soil. It should be crumbly, shouldn't smell, it should smell earthy. You shouldn't be able to smell your coffee grounds or your carrots or whatever you put in there. It should no longer look like that stuff. Just nice and like the stuff you'd buy at the store or the nursery. So just just depends. All right, so we'll move on to old potting soil. We've got a couple questions about that here. What do you do with used soil from pots?
Oh, Ken, what should I be honest about this? I do reuse it, although with extension, we often say it's not a good idea to do that. It does depend what you grew in there in the years past. And so especially if in my yard, I do have to rotate a lot of my like tomatoes, a lot of my solanaceous stuff, rotate that into pots for a year just because of lack of full sun area. And so I would not plant a tomato in the same pot that I had a tomato in the year before. I would not put a pepper in that pot. I would not put a potato in that pot. Nothing in that nightshade family would go in that pot. Now I might take the soil out of that pot and use it to plant, say my mums for the fall, or perhaps I have some vinca, I believe I might have this. I'll correct it here with some text. Cephalanthus, I think. No, that's the wrong one. That's buttonbush, I believe. I'll think of it and I'll just put text right here about the correct vinca species, because people are probably thinking I'm talking about ground cover, but that's not it. Anyway, so yes, I would take annuals, cosmos, all that stuff, and I would put that in that soil. But petunias are also in the nightshade family, so you might want to avoid that. But so yeah, that is my strategy. I try not to reuse potting soil for the same family or the same crop. Or yeah, Ken, do you got any probably more better ways to utilize old potting soil than what I just described?
I don't know about that. I reuse to some extent. Sometimes dahlias, they get brought in the pot, they get taken back out in the pot, and they never leave. And usually after a couple of years of stuff being in the pots, it gets dumped in the raised beds or in the vegetable garden. And that organic matter.
Yeah. A lot of my old potting soil this last year wound up around our blueberries. And that's just because we had a spot that it was a little bit lower there. And so we just top dressed our blueberries with old potting soil. And I don't think it'll kill them. I'm doing other things that are killing them besides that. So like neglecting them, probably not spraying them when they have a horrible disease, but that's another show. We'll talk blueberries some other time. Oh, Ken, next question about old potting soil concerns a component of potting soil, perlite. So perlite is often used as a soil medium or as a kind of facilitates good drainage in that soil media. But since it's not biodegradable, is it bad if we put this in our garden soil?
I would say no. So perlite is volcanic rock that's been heated up and kind of turned into popcorn almost, so to speak.
Mhm.
So it's inert and doesn't really react. The soil, it'll hold on to some moisture, but it's not holding on to tremendous amounts. So I don't think it's going to really affect anything. You're not putting it on there in quantities where it would cause any problems. And even if you did put a lot on there, I'm not sure how many or if it would cause any problems. May help your drainage a little bit, but again, it'd be kind of like sand. You'd have to put a just ridiculous amount
Yeah,
on there to do much good.
it's
Yeah,
it's like
so yeah, I dump mine in the garden and raised beds, and I have not seen any. It's not scientific proof, but I haven't seen
yeah.
any ill effects.
No, I think like you said, I was thinking of the sand thing too, as we had talked before. It's like the sheer volume of soil to the like handful of perlite that's in potting mix and up in a container, probably won't matter that much. So yeah, it's an inert material. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
And if you're walking around and working in there, you're probably crushing it. And
Mhm.
after a few years, you probably wouldn't even recognize it anymore. It's ground up. All right, next question here. Can you plant directly into the bags that soil comes in?
I see people do this a lot. You go to the garden center, you buy a bag of topsoil or garden soil or whatever they want to call it, and they just cut like a slit in it and they plant their stuff right in it. They don't even take it out of the bag. If you're doing like flowers, annuals, things like that, yeah, that might work. If you're doing something like a tomato, yeah, probably need to put it in a pot or something where you can develop a good root system, because you're not going to get much of a root system in a bag. It's only like 2 feet wide by like 2.5 feet long. So you need more volume. You need more space, or more ideal space. The other thing I've noticed is that those bags, they can get really hot in the sun. So you'd be cooking your root system as well. And then this doesn't really have anything to do with growing in it, but whenever I see people doing this, I am always amused at the weeds that pop up also. It's like there's like they cut the slits in there and they planted their tomato in it, and then not only is their tomato growing, but they have like a whole like quack grass or crabgrass. It's like just has just sprouted all over that bag. And so something to keep in mind is that soil has weed seeds. We talked about that a little bit with our compost pile, but manure has weed seeds. The soil has weed seeds. It's a lot of management there. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Something I've noticed over time.
Yeah, I've seen it done with potting soil too. Yeah, just so I said, and I'd say if you're going to do that, poke some holes in the bottom so that
Oh yeah.
when it does rain, you're not turning that into a swampy, nasty, anaerobic mess. There. Speak from experience. We left some bags of potting soil out over the winter, and we went to use them yesterday, and they smelled lovely
Oh
because
my
water
gosh,
got
I
in there
bet.
and it could not get out. So put some holes in there so the water can drain out. And like you said, like tomato, something big. If you're going to try that, a pot, a very small, only getting a foot and a half tall, maybe 2 feet,
Mhm.
or you're going to be building a giant trellis around that plant to support it, because that's going to be so top heavy compared to that
Yes.
little bag of soil or potting mix you got. It's going to tip over in no time.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. My tomato containers are I can't lift them by myself. They're big and they're heavy. And so tomatoes need a lot of soil volume when they're growing in a container. So just be mindful of that as much as we can give them.
Be ready to water a lot, just like a pot
Mhm.
if it dries out.
Yep. Yep. Well, Ken, our last question for today about soils and composting. And this person is asking, should we bother with cover crops in a raised bed or in containers?
For containers, I would say probably not, because ideally we're not using the same pot over and over again. And I would say typically the pots people are using are not terribly large. And using a cover crop in there probably isn't going to do a whole lot of good. Raised beds, you could probably do that. Again, theirs are, more of a perennial type thing. So you've got that soil in there for years, and if you've that organic matter in there is going to break down just like it would in the ground. So adding those cover crops can help reduce some of that. Could help with weed suppression, depending on how you use it. If you just use it as a mulch, you can grow it and then kill it off. Use it as a mulch on your raised beds. I think you could. It would work in a raised bed, again, provided it's not a little tiny raised bed. If it's a somewhat decent size, I would say it'd be good. Now, if you've only got one raised bed, the quantity of seeds usually you're buying with raised or with cover crops, you're probably going to end up with a whole lot more than you're going to need if you've only got a single bed, but that's all right. Keep it in a cool place. Maybe it can last for a few years for you.
I have so many daikon radish. I bought 2 5-pound bags, and I think I used half a pound. So I got a lot of, they call oil seed radish. So I got a lot of that stuff. And it'll last me for years and years. And I have done cover crops and raised beds. I've found I do like utilizing cover crops and raised beds. The one thing I've noticed with raised beds is it is an artificially made medium. I normally say, it's a perfect world. We put as much soil, remember the mineral stuff, the sand, salt, and clay, into a raised bed as we can to facilitate that a natural soil structure. But very often it's people mix in a lot of compost with it. They mix in a lot of peat, a lot of organic matter gets mixed in with it. So it's fairly artificial. It settles a lot. And our colleague, Dwayne Friend, I think he was on this show many years ago, and he talked about, was it the glomalin? Is that the right term that the roots produce? And it allows the soil that we've put in the raised beds, it's all mixed up, it's been tilled and everything. It allows it to form a little bit more of a structure for plant roots, because that glomalin produced by roots allows the soil, I'm reaching deep into soils here, the soil peds to form, so we have more structure, and it glams the soil together. Glam, I think that's the technical term, glam.
I think you're right.
So yeah, give it a shot. In my garden beds, I use a winter kill cover crop. I believe it's oats and field peas that they die in a hard frost. So I'll pop some pictures in as I'm talking about how we sow those underneath our tomatoes and peppers, and then how we use them to create a once living mulch for the next year. Well, that was a lot of information about soils and compost in the garden today. My brain is spinning. I need to get outside and get my hands dirty again to see what kind of soil I have in my yard. And I know it's not that great. So I got to start adding some more organic matter. Got to get to work on the soil, because that's the foundation of everything, folks. The Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. A special thanks to Ken Johnson. Thank you for hanging out with me, Ken, once again this week, answering questions about soil and compost.
Yes, thank you. We've got plenty more things to plant here, so I'll be out and digging in the dirt or the soil.
Don't call it dirt. Yeah, they dock you pay if we call it dirt.
And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. We've got a lot of irons in the fire, and so we have a lot of topics that we want to get to. So it'll be a surprise for you and us about what we talk about next week. But you better believe it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to learn a lot. So listeners, thank you for what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.